The first time I heard her voice, it wasn't just heard. It burrowed into me, like the soft press of a fingertip tracing the outlines of my spine, igniting something that had been dormant for years. "You're ready," she said, and the words landed in the quiet of my apartment like a small, deliberate storm. I froze, because I didn't know if I was ready at all. I had spent my whole life moving through the world like a shadow, hiding little things even from myself, curiosities that embarrassed me, feelings I couldn't name, desires that made my stomach twist in guilt and shame. Yet somehow, her voice knew them. It spoke directly to the corners of me I didn't dare illuminate, and in that moment, I understood that my life as I had known it was quietly, irreversibly shifting. I remember standing at my window that evening, staring at the streetlights reflecting in puddles after the rain, trying to breathe in slowly, methodically, as if I could suck some courage into my lungs. My hands shook slightly, and I caught the motion in the dim reflection of the glass. The skin of my fingers looked paler than usual, almost translucent, and I felt the smallest, strangest thrill imagining them adorned with something more delicate. Nail polish, rings, the kind of small, intimate details I had always shied away from. Every instinct told me to step back, to close the window, to pretend I hadn't heard her voice at all. But another, subtler instinct, soft, seductive, insistent, pushed me forward, and I realized I could no longer ignore it. The package arrived a week later, and even the way it came felt like a ritual. Not ordinary shipping tape, not bland cardboard. It was wrapped in deep, plush velvet, tied with a ribbon that smelled faintly of rosewater and candle smoke, the scent curling around me like a whispered promise. I lingered over it for minutes that stretched and warped. My fingers hovered over the fabric as though touching it too soon would break some fragile spell. When I finally untied the ribbon, my hands brushed the smooth, luxurious surface of the cloth, and I felt a strange electricity surge from my fingertips up into my shoulders, into my chest. Inside were items I had never allowed myself to imagine owning. Skirts that flowed like liquid silk, blouses soft enough to feel like skin, shoes that promised a grace I didn't yet understand. Each piece seemed to hum with possibility, as though aware it had been chosen for me, as though it could see the potential I had tried to deny. I set the pieces on my bed, running my hands over each one, imagining how it might feel to wear them. And then, almost instinctively, I started with the dress. The first touch against my skin was like discovering a new sense. My chest tightened with a peculiar ache that was neither purely fear nor pure excitement, but something in between, a trembling of possibility. As I pulled the dress over my shoulders, the fabric sliding over my skin, I felt the first real crack in the walls I had built around myself. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and nearly recoiled. The reflection staring back wasn't exactly me, not yet, but it was undeniably a version of me I had been hiding from. My jaw softened under the gentle fall of the fabric, my shoulders narrowed, my chest lifted in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Every glance at the mirror made my heartbeat quicken, as if the reflection itself were alive and pulsing with its own consciousness. And yet it wasn't only about the appearance. It was about everything that seeing myself this way unlocked. I felt exposed, raw, and achingly real. Thoughts tumbled through my mind like a storm I couldn't contain. Fear, shame, longing, disbelief, and a strange, almost sacred exhilaration. I whispered to myself, "Who am I becoming?" And the question lingered in the air like smoke. The answer, I realized, was already threading through me, subtle but relentless, reshaping my breathing, the way I moved, even the way I imagined the world beyond my apartment walls. There was a note tucked into the package, written in flowing, deliberate handwriting that made my chest ache with a kind of awe I hadn't anticipated. "Do not fight what is already awakening. Let it guide you. The world outside may not understand, but the world within will always see you." I read the note over and over, letting the words sink into my skin, into my muscles, into my heartbeat. Each reading felt like a tiny revelation, a quiet confirmation that what I felt was valid, that the trembling inside me wasn't weakness, but the birth of something I had been denying myself for years. That night, lying in bed dressed in silk and lace, I couldn't sleep. I wasn't cold. I was alive in a way that terrified me, my body and mind vibrating with the weight and wonder of a transformation that wasn't just outward, but seeping into the deepest crevices of who I had been. I traced the lines of my face in the mirror again and again. My cheekbones looked softer, my lips more defined, my eyes, though still mine, seemed larger, more open, more capable of seeing and being seen. Every detail felt like a brushstroke painting someone I had always been, hidden beneath layers of habit and caution. I wondered how the world would react if it could see this version of me. The thought was equal parts thrilling and terrifying. I felt the fragile tension of a secret poised on the edge of revelation, knowing that soon I would have to test the waters beyond my room, beyond the safety of mirrors and whispered self-affirmations. And still, beneath the exhilaration, there was fear, the fear of failure, of ridicule, of rejection. But even as the fear coiled in my chest, it didn't dominate. It was present, yes, but no longer overwhelming. I realized with a trembling sort of certainty that this exploration, this awakening, was mine. No one could take it away, no one could invalidate it. I was becoming someone new, someone brave, someone unafraid to face the mirror, and eventually the world as exactly who I was. I felt the first flickers of joy, fragile and bright, like candlelight in a winded room. And in that quiet, trembling joy, I understood that the journey had begun, and there was no turning back. The days after the package arrived stretched like a fragile, tense wire, each one trembling under the weight of anticipation and fear. I couldn't focus on work, on food, on the mundane rhythm of my life. Every moment felt suspended, as though the world outside my apartment was moving through fog while I existed in a spotlight, painfully aware of the self I was beginning to cultivate. I kept the velvet and silk carefully folded on my bed, running my fingers over the fabric whenever the unease rose too high, almost as if touching it could anchor me to the version of myself I could barely yet claim. Her voice echoed in my mind constantly, soft and insistent. "You're ready. Let it guide you." I remember the first call. Hearing her voice on the phone made my chest constrict in a way I hadn't known I could feel. She wasn't just speaking, she was observing, sensing. Every pause, every word she chose carried meaning, and it unnerved me. "You'll need more than clothing," she said, almost casually. "You'll need understanding, practice, ritual. You cannot simply wear the outside without honoring the inside." I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and nodded even though she couldn't see me. I felt both exposed and sheltered, as if I were simultaneously under a microscope and a blanket. The first task she gave me was simple in words but monumental in execution. Study myself. Not the reflection I had always glanced at with casual detachment, but really study myself. Observe the lines, the angles, the way light hit my skin, the subtle shifts in posture. I was to stand in front of the mirror for hours, tracing the curves of my face, experimenting with gestures, imagining how each movement could feel if I allowed myself to inhabit it fully. I laughed nervously the first time I tried, my hands trembling as I touched my jawline, my hips, my shoulders. But even in that awkwardness, there was a strange kind of thrill, a sense that I was peeling back layers I had long thought permanent. Every reflection was a small revolution. My hair, long but unruly, became a tool, a frame I could manipulate to reveal or conceal, to hint at who I was becoming. I tried different ways of tying it, letting it cascade over my shoulders, pulling it back to expose the neck I had always ignored. And with each experiment, a new sensation bloomed in me: confidence, vulnerability, curiosity, fear. Her voice guided me through it, gentle but precise. "Notice how you feel. The body is honest. Listen to it. It will tell you truths your mind may not yet admit." I began to move differently, almost imperceptibly at first. A sway in my hips when I walked to the kitchen, a tilt of the shoulders, the slow curl of fingers around objects as if I were learning a choreography I'd always forgotten. Each tiny adjustment was terrifying. What if I looked ridiculous? What if someone saw and laughed? And yet, a quiet, persistent fire kept me moving forward. Even alone in my apartment, I felt an awareness of space, of presence, of possibility. I was no longer just existing. I was performing, yes, but also discovering, shaping, learning to occupy a new world of self. Then came the makeup. I had avoided it for years, dismissing it as frivolous, unnecessary. But she guided me through it with patience, describing every brush stroke, every color choice, the subtle ways to enhance without concealing, to transform without hiding. I spent hours practicing, blending, wiping, reapplying. My eyes, always sharp, always observing, opened differently in the mirror. I could see possibilities in their reflection, small revelations that made me shiver. And when I finally finished one evening, staring at the person in the mirror with painted eyes and softened cheekbones, I felt something stir in my chest, something I could only describe as recognition. She was right. The body was honest. The reflection was no longer just skin and bone. It was me, fully, honestly me, in ways I had long denied myself. I practiced my voice next, speaking softly at first, over and over, testing the rise and fall of tones, the gentle curves of inflection, the way a subtle smile could shift a sentence from commanding to inviting. Every attempt left me exhausted, but also exhilarated. For the first time, I felt the alignment of inner and outer selves, the thrill of synchronization. I whispered to the mirror, "Am I ready?" And in the reflection, the eyes seemed to answer back with a small, resolute gleam. Then came the real test, stepping outside. She didn't push me too fast. Her methods were deliberate, almost surgical. The first venture was to a nearby cafe early morning when streets were quiet. My hands shook in the small purse I had been instructed to carry, my chest tight with anticipation. Each step to the door felt like crossing a chasm, a delicate rope suspended over judgment, ridicule, misunderstanding. And yet, as I walked, as strangers passed and smiled politely without noticing anything unusual, I felt something unfurl inside me. A fragile, tentative courage, a sense that perhaps I could occupy the world as this person without collapse, without shame. But the tension never fully left. Every glance from a passerby, every whispered comment carried the potential to shatter me. I kept my back straight, my shoulders soft, my head held high, reminding myself that the mirror had taught me the truth of my body, the honesty of my reflection. I returned home that day drained, elated, and trembling in ways I could not entirely explain. I realized more clearly than ever that the journey was not merely external. Every step forward required confronting my fears, my assumptions, the deep-seated shame I had carried like a second skin. At night, lying in bed with Silk brushing my skin, I wrote in a notebook she had suggested I keep. Observations, feelings, small victories, crushing doubts. The pages filled with sketches of posture, notes on voice, fragments of dreams, and the quiet, desperate hope that I could reconcile the person in the mirror with the one in the world. I could feel the transformation spreading beyond the physical, the softening of muscles, the delicate recalibration of gestures, the subtle reshaping of thought itself. And as I wrote, I felt her presence again, not just in voice but in spirit, guiding me, insisting gently. Do not fight what is awakening. Let it bloom. Let it take its time. The world can wait. You cannot. I fell asleep that night with trembling fingers brushing the velvet skirt I had folded beside my bed, a strange exhilaration thrumming through me. I had begun a journey that I could not yet name, a slow, deliberate unraveling and rebuilding of self. And though fear remained, sharp, insistent, sometimes overwhelming, I also felt the first spark of something I had never allowed myself to feel. Unshakable hope, fragile and bright, that the person I had glimpsed in the mirror could one day step into the world fully, boldly, without apology. The day I first stepped out fully dressed, not just in the safe shadows of my apartment, but into the bustling streets of the city, felt like stepping off a cliff with no visible ground beneath me. I woke early that morning, heart already hammering in my chest, hands trembling despite the calm routines I tried to force on myself. Silk brushed against my skin as I dressed, the familiar softness both comforting and electric, each motion loaded with intent. I stared at my reflection endlessly, tracing the contours of my face, the curve of my jaw, the softness in my eyes. Everything felt heightened, the way light glinted off the subtle highlights in my hair, the slight sway of my hips, the way my posture shifted when I allowed myself to inhabit this new body fully. I had rehearsed this day for weeks in solitude. Every gesture, every tone of voice, every nuanced step I took had been practiced in front of mirrors, under the watchful guidance of her voice in my ears, soft and commanding. Presence is everything. You must inhabit yourself fully or the world will not see you. But rehearsed as it was, the moment I stepped out, the city struck me like a tidal wave of sound, movement, and possibility. I gripped the small purse in my hand as if it were a lifeline, feeling the delicate tremor in my fingers and willing it to steady. Each step down the sidewalk was a negotiation with every fear I had ever held. I imagined eyes scanning me, whispering judgments I could not hear, and yet somehow nothing happened. People passed, glances here and there, polite smiles, indifferent commuters, and slowly, tentatively, my panic gave way to something else: presence. I could feel it in my chest, a fragile bloom of confidence, a delicate but undeniable awareness of being fully, audaciously seen. The sensation was intoxicating. I began to notice the small details in my surroundings: the wind catching a stray lock of hair, the subtle rustle of my skirt against my thighs, the way my heels clicked on the pavement. And I realized with a shiver that the world was alive in ways I had never allowed myself to notice before. And yet the fear never completely left me. Every car that honked too close, every whispered conversation, every person who glanced at me more than once carried a weight, a tension that made my stomach twist. I questioned myself endlessly. Was I too bold? Too soft? Did I look ridiculous? Was my makeup right? Had I exaggerated some curve, some gesture that would betray me as an imposter? But each moment of self-doubt also carried a countercurrent of exhilaration, a rebellious spark that whispered I had the right to be here, to move through this world as this person I had been nurturing in secret. The cafe I had chosen for my first stop was quiet, tucked into a corner of the city where streets curved and sunlight fell in warm slants through large windows. I stepped inside, heart hammering, hands still clutching the purse as if it were a shield. The barista greeted me, polite and oblivious, and for the first time I realized I could inhabit a space, occupy it fully without shame. I sat at a table, ordered a coffee, and watched the sunlight flicker across the table's surface, feeling the thrill of normalcy in the ordinary. A few patrons glanced my way, politely curious, and I smiled softly at myself in the reflection of the glass, realizing that the fear had been mine, not theirs. But the relief was fragile. Later, as I walked through the streets, a group of teenagers passed, their laughter piercing the air. For a moment I froze, imagining that it was directed at me. My chest tightened, my hands trembled, and I felt the old shame coil itself around my spine like a snake. I wanted to turn back, to run home, to retreat into the safe cocoon of mirrors and velvet skirts. But then, almost imperceptibly, I remembered her words. The world outside may not understand, but the world within will always see you. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and continued walking, each step an assertion of the self I had been cultivating, a defiance of the fear that had tried to hold me captive for years. That evening, alone in my apartment, I collapsed onto the bed, exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. I traced the curves of my body in the mirror, noticing the subtle changes that had emerged not from the dress or the makeup, but from the way I had carried myself, from the courage I had summoned, from the audacity of simply showing up. I journaled frantically, spilling pages of observation, doubt, revelation, and hope. I wrote about the flutter of adrenaline when someone smiled politely, the tightening of my chest when I imagined judgment, the warmth that spread through me when I realized that the person in the mirror and the person walking the streets were, finally, aligned. Over the following weeks, the process intensified. I began experimenting with more complex outfits, each one a statement, a challenge, a negotiation between who I had been and who I was becoming. Blouses with delicate lace, skirts that swirled around my knees, shoes that carried me with a new kind of rhythm. Each choice felt like a declaration, a claim on space that had long been denied me. I studied body language, voice, expression, gestures, learning to inhabit each nuance with careful precision. Her guidance remained constant, a tether and a compass. Presence is not just being seen, it is being felt. Let them feel you, but never lose yourself. And yet, the tension never fully dissipated. Every social interaction became a delicate balance. Friendships, colleagues, acquaintances, all of them carried the potential to shatter or affirm this fragile new identity. I learned to read subtle cues in expressions, to gauge tone, to adjust posture, voice, and gestures in real time, a constant negotiation between authenticity and perception. Some encounters left me elated, my chest light with triumph, while others left me raw and trembling, my mind replaying imagined slights in endless loops. Each evening, I fell into bed exhausted, heart pounding, a mix of elation and terror curling through me like a living thing. Yet amidst the fear and the triumph, there was an undeniable truth taking root in me. I could no longer deny it. This process was no longer about the clothes, the makeup, the voice. It was about claiming space, inhabiting presence, acknowledging a self that had been waiting in the shadows for years. The reflection in the mirror, once a stranger, was now familiar, almost intimate. I spoke to it softly at night, whispering confessions, doubts, hopes, and slowly, I began to understand that the journey was not toward a final form, but toward alignment, toward a harmony between inner truth and outward expression that had always felt impossible. By the end of that month, I could walk through streets and cafes with a fragile but growing confidence, aware of judgment, aware of potential ridicule, but no longer paralyzed by it. I carried the memory of every trembling step, every whispered affirmation, every practiced gesture, and folded it into a mosaic of self that was uniquely mine. And in the quiet of my apartment, with silk brushing against skin and the city lights casting long shadows across the walls, I finally understood. The transformation was not just physical. It was emotional, psychological, spiritual. Every hesitation, every fear, every tiny triumph had sculpted me, shaping a person I had only glimpsed before in fleeting moments of secret reflection. The mornings started to feel different, though I couldn't yet name why. I woke with a heightened awareness of my body, my posture, the subtle alignment of every limb, every curve, every gesture I had practiced until it no longer felt artificial. Silk brushing against my skin was no longer just comfort, it was affirmation. A tangible, electric reminder that the person in the mirror was not a fantasy, not a borrowed identity, but me, slowly and irreversibly claiming space in a world that had never been designed for me. Yet, with every step forward, the weight of fear pressed against my chest, heavier than ever. I knew I had to test myself beyond my carefully rehearsed routines, beyond quiet streets and polite cafes. I had to face the unpredictable chaos of the world, the social interactions that demanded more than preparation. The first true test came unexpectedly. A friend I hadn't seen in months called to invite me to a small gathering, a casual dinner at someone else's apartment. My heart slammed in my chest the moment I considered accepting. Every fiber of me screamed to retreat, to invent an excuse, to hide in the safety of my apartment where mirrors reflected a version of me I could control. But her voice, the one that had guided me since the velvet package arrived, echoed clearly. Growth is never without risk. You must go where fear waits. I closed my eyes, inhaled slowly, and agreed. The night of the dinner, I spent hours preparing. Makeup was applied with painstaking care, each contour and highlight a declaration of my presence. The dress I chose felt like armor and invitation all at once, silk flowing softly over curves I had long ignored. I practiced my voice repeatedly, finding the cadence that felt natural, confident, and true. When I finally stepped in front of the mirror, I barely recognized the person staring back at me. Not just the reflection, but the air around me seemed different. I could feel a fragile energy radiating from my body, a trembling, tentative claim of space that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The cab ride to the apartment felt endless. Every passing streetlight, every glance from pedestrians made my stomach twist. I imagined what awaited me: laughter, judgment, curiosity, misunderstanding. I clutched my purse in a way that was almost desperate, willing it to be a shield. When the door opened and my friend greeted me, polite and warm, my heart threatened to leap out of my chest. The inside of the apartment was filled with voices, laughter, movement. Each one carried potential judgment. I felt exposed, vulnerable, yet undeniably alive. For the first hour, I hovered on the edge of the room, small movements measured, my voice cautious. I could feel my pulse in my ears, my hands trembling despite my best efforts. Yet, as conversations flowed around me, a subtle transformation occurred. Each smile directed at me, each glance that lingered politely, became a small affirmation. Every laugh that included me without hesitation whispered that the world, or at least this small corner of it, could accept me as I was. I began to move more freely, hands gesturing naturally, posture softening yet confident, voice rising and falling with ease I hadn't yet believed I could claim. And then came the moment that nearly shattered me. Someone asked where I had been all these months. My pulse spiked. Should I tell the truth, invent a vague excuse, retreat into shadows? My mind spun in panic. And yet something in me, fragile but insistent, pushed forward. I spoke carefully, softly, a version of truth that felt like a bridge rather than a surrender. I watched their reactions, each subtle shift in expression, searching for ridicule, rejection, anything to confirm my fears. And to my astonishment, there was nothing. Only curiosity, polite interest, gentle acceptance. The realization struck me like lightning. I could exist outside the mirror, outside the velvet skirts and silk blouses, and still be seen, still be accepted. That night, walking home alone, the city felt transformed. Streetlights glinted like tiny affirmations, the wind whispered against my hair, my steps clicked against the pavement in a rhythm that felt entirely my own. I realized that fear would always be part of this journey, but it no longer had the power to paralyze me. I could carry it, navigate it, and still move forward. My reflection in the shop windows, catching the glow of the city lights, seemed more alive, more real than ever before. I caught myself smiling softly, a quiet acknowledgement of the courage I had summoned, the risks I had faced, the boundaries I had begun to push. The weeks that followed were an intricate dance between fear and affirmation. Each day brought new challenges, subtle and overt. A glance in a crowded store could feel like judgment, a compliment could feel like a test. I experimented with bolder clothing, more expressive gestures, nuanced inflections in my voice, each step a negotiation between self-expression and social expectation. Some days I faltered, collapsing into bed exhausted, mind replaying imagined slights in endless loops. Other days I soared, stepping through spaces with a presence I had once believed impossible. Through it all, her voice remained in my mind, soft but unwavering. Every step, every glance, every moment is yours. Claim it. But the journey was far from linear. One afternoon, while meeting someone for coffee, I felt a sudden, sharp pang of fear, as if the world had collectively turned its gaze on me. My hands shook, my chest tightened, and I felt the familiar instinct to flee. And yet something in me had changed. I remembered the countless hours of preparation, the mirrors, the notes, the voice guiding me through trembling gestures and whispered affirmations. I inhaled, counted silently, and forced myself to stay. I engaged, laughed, gestured naturally. By the end of the encounter, I realized I had faced a test that would once have undone me, and survived. Night after night, I journaled obsessively, cataloging the emotional roller coaster, the triumphs, the setbacks, the small victories, and the devastating moments of doubt. I traced my body in mirrors, recorded my voice, practiced gestures endlessly. Each reflection, each recording, each observation became a tool, a compass guiding me through uncharted territory. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I noticed the transformation stretching beyond the physical. My thoughts shifted, my perception of the world deepened, my empathy sharpened. I was learning not just to inhabit a new identity, but to understand it, nurture it, own it without apology. By the end of this chapter of my journey, I realized a truth I had not expected. Transformation is not about perfection. It is about persistence, courage, and honesty. Every trembling step, every faltering gesture, every heartbeat of fear had contributed to something greater than appearance. I had begun to merge the reflection in the mirror with the person moving through the world, creating a harmony I had long believed impossible. And as I lay in bed that night, velvet skirts folded neatly beside me, city lights flickering through the window, I felt an unfamiliar, radiant sense of completion. Fragile, yes, but real, undeniable, and mine. The days grew longer, the air warmer, but nothing in the seasons could compare to the intensity of the transformation I was living. Every morning began the same way. I woke with my body humming, anticipation and anxiety coiled together like twin serpents in my chest. Silk brushing against my skin was no longer just comforting. It was a signal, a tactile proof that I had claimed this self fully, that the reflection in the mirror was not a stranger but a truth I could inhabit. Yet every time I stepped outside, the world seemed like a labyrinth of judgment, expectation, and possibility, and I had to navigate it with all the vigilance I could muster. One particular morning, I faced a challenge that would test every ounce of courage I had built over the months. I had been invited to a networking event, a gathering of professionals, many of whom knew me before this transformation began. The thought of encountering colleagues, acquaintances, even friends in this space was simultaneously thrilling and paralyzing. I spent hours preparing, meticulously choosing an outfit that balanced elegance with subtlety, carefully adjusting makeup, smoothing every crease, practicing the cadence of my voice until it felt natural. My reflection in the mirror no longer startled me, it encouraged me, but the anxiety lingered like a shadow I could not banish. The cab ride to the venue was a study in self-control. I could feel the adrenaline thrumming through my veins, the small, almost imperceptible tremor in my hands as I clutched my purse. Every glance from pedestrians felt like a test, every reflection in shop windows like a reminder that the world outside my apartment would see me before I was fully ready. Yet I told myself what I had whispered countless times before. Presence is everything. The body is honest. Claim it, inhabit it fully. Each repetition of her words steadied me, grounding me in a confidence that felt tenuous yet real. Stepping through the doors of the venue was like entering a different universe. Voices overlapped, music pulsed faintly through the air, and I felt every gaze brush against me as if it were a physical touch. For the first few minutes, I hovered near the edge of the room, hands clasped, eyes scanning, every muscle taut. Then someone smiled, a colleague I had known for years, and the tension in my chest loosened slightly. I realized that I could exist in this space, could move and speak and be seen, and that some people could accept me as I was without question or hesitation. But the relief was fleeting. Soon, someone else approached, a figure whose eyes lingered just a moment too long, whose tone carried subtle curiosity. I could feel the old anxiety coil around my spine, every instinct screaming to retreat. My hands tightened on the purse my voice caught. And yet, as I met their gaze, I realized something remarkable. I could stand in this tension, breathe through it, navigate it, and remain whole. My reflection in the glass doors behind them seemed almost to nod, as if affirming the truth I was still daring to claim. The evening became a dance of micro-adjustments, subtle cues, and social negotiation. Each gesture, each inflection of voice, each shift in posture was deliberate, a blend of rehearsal and instinct. Some interactions left me elated, my chest light with triumph, a flush of exhilaration spreading through me. Others left me trembling, heart-pounding, replaying imagined slights with obsessive intensity. But through it all, I noticed a change. I was no longer solely reacting to fear. I was creating, shaping, asserting presence in ways that were deliberate, conscious, powerful. There was one moment that would forever remain etched in my memory. A person I had once considered a mentor, someone whose judgment I had always feared, approached and addressed me directly. My stomach clenched, my hands threatened to tremble, my voice threatened to fail. And yet when I spoke, there was no hesitation. My words were steady, measured, confident. Every nuance of tone, every gesture, every expression had been honed in mirrors, rehearsals, whispers, and sleepless nights. When they smiled at me, genuine and unguarded, I realized I had crossed a threshold I had never thought possible. I had inhabited myself fully, in front of someone whose opinion had once terrified me. The walk home that night was transformative. The city streets were alive, yet softened by the glow of streetlights and the quiet hum of traffic. I moved with a rhythm entirely my own, steps deliberate, hands relaxed, head lifted. Each reflection in a shop window, each shadow, each flicker of light reinforced what I had begun to understand. The journey was no longer about concealment, about hiding from judgment or fear. It was about inhabiting space with honesty, with presence, with courage. The fear remained, sharp, insistent, unavoidable, but it no longer dictated my actions. The weeks that followed continued this pattern, a complex tapestry of fear and affirmation, hesitation and triumph. I experimented with bolder choices, longer skirts, delicate jewelry, hairstyles that framed my face in new ways. Every step was an act of courage, a negotiation between self-expression and societal expectation. Some days I faltered, collapsing into bed exhausted, mind replaying every imagined misstep. Other days I soared, stepping into rooms, streets, conversations with a confidence I had never believed I could possess. Her voice remained my constant guide, a tether anchoring me through every tremor of doubt. Every glance, every step, every word is yours. Claim it. You belong. I began journaling obsessively, documenting not only outfits or gestures, but emotions, thoughts, dreams, fears, and triumphs. Each page became a testament to the complexity of transformation, a record of growth and vulnerability. I sketched postures, noted voice inflections, chronicled fleeting feelings of shame and surging waves of pride. Slowly, I began to notice that the transformation had seeped far beyond physical appearance. My thoughts, perceptions, interactions, all were subtly reshaped, attuned to a self that was no longer emerging but existing, fully, unapologetically, undeniably. One evening, I caught a reflection that made my breath catch. Standing in a shop window, framed by soft city lights, I looked at the person I had become. Every detail, the tilt of my chin, the subtle sway of my hips, the softness in my eyes, the cadence of my voice, spoke of months of dedication, fear, rehearsal, triumph, and vulnerability. I realized that the reflection was no longer a mirror of longing or aspiration. It was a mirror of truth, honesty, and self-possession. The velvet, the silk, the whispered guidance, they were tools, not masks. I had inhabited the self they revealed, and it was mine. That night, I sat at my desk, journal open, hands tracing the worn edges of pages filled with months of experience, and I wrote, "I am no longer a shadow. I am here. I am seen. I am becoming fully, irrevocably myself." And for the first time, I truly believed it, not as a fragile hope, not as a whispered dream, but as a lived, breathing truth. The journey was far from over. Fear, doubt, and challenge would always be companions. But I had discovered an essential, unshakable fact. The self I had long hidden, nurtured in secrecy and whispers, could now exist fully, boldly, and unapologetically in the world. The morning I decided I would no longer hide, even in the smallest corners of the world, began like any other, but everything felt monumental. I woke with a strange, electric energy thrumming in my body, silk brushing against skin like a subtle affirmation. The reflection in the mirror greeted me not with uncertainty, not with hesitation, but with recognition. I caught myself in the glance of my own eyes and realized I no longer recoiled from the person staring back. I was fully present. Every curve, every line, every detail of my face and posture had been sculpted not just by fabric and cosmetics, but by months of trembling courage, obsessive practice, sleepless nights, whispered guidance, and incremental triumphs. The plan was simple in theory, terrifying in execution. I would spend the day entirely as myself, fully, unapologetically, in public spaces I had once feared. No cautious entrances, no rehearsed interactions, no safe corners. I would exist in the world exactly as I was, allowing every person, every glance, every potential judgment to encounter me fully. My pulse raced as I dressed, each layer of clothing a declaration, each delicate accessory a statement of identity. The mirror reflected someone I had learned to trust, someone whose existence was not borrowed from imagination, but lived, embodied, earned. I practiced my voice, not to disguise but to assert, every syllable carrying subtle authority and quiet warmth. Stepping outside, the city seemed transformed, or perhaps I had been transformed enough to see it in a new light. Streets that once felt hostile now pulsed with possibility. I moved through the crowds, hands relaxed, posture open, eyes steady, yet constantly alert. Every glance from passers-by, every half-smile, every pedestrian sidestep became a calibration of reality. I was still navigating the unpredictable, yet I no longer felt entirely at its mercy. Fear had become a companion rather than a master. I could feel it, acknowledge it, and continue forward. It was an intimate negotiation, a balance I had honed through months of trial, observation, and quiet rehearsal. The first encounter was unexpected. A stranger on the street, a woman carrying groceries, smiled at me as I passed. Something in her eyes, a fleeting recognition, a warmth without judgment, made my chest constrict and my throat tight. I smiled back, the gesture natural, effortless, fully mine. In that instant, I realized that the presence I had cultivated, painstakingly, had the power to communicate not just identity, but humanity. I could exist fully, and in doing so, I made the world respond, even in the smallest ways. The realization surged through me like lightning. The transformation was no longer about secrecy or control. It was about life, unfiltered, unmitigated, undeniable. The cafe I chose for my next stop was bustling, filled with conversations and the scent of fresh coffee. I walked in, each step deliberate, each movement practiced yet spontaneous. Eyes followed me occasionally, briefly. Some were curious, some indifferent, some dismissive. I could feel the familiar flutter of nerves, but it was no longer debilitating. I seated myself, ordered a drink, and allowed myself to exist in the space without apology. The reflection in the window across from my table caught my gaze, and for the first time, I didn't see a reflection of doubt. I saw someone fully embodied, fully present, fully alive. The subtle arch of my posture, the gentle tilt of my chin, the calm cadence of my breathing, all spoke of a self that had long been denied, now claiming territory both private and public. Hours passed, a mix of mundane interactions and subtle tests. Conversations with baristas, casual smiles from strangers, the occasional glance of recognition from someone who might have known me in another life, all became part of a rhythm. Each encounter was a brushstroke in the painting of self, a verification of existence. I began to notice, in subtle ways, how my confidence radiated outward, influencing the space around me. Even moments of awkwardness, small stumbles, were absorbed not as failure but as texture, a demonstration that imperfection did not diminish presence. As evening approached, I decided to take a longer walk, moving through streets and parks I had once avoided. Shadows stretched, the wind whispered against my hair, the city hummed with life and possibility. I felt my body fully aligned with my intentions, each step deliberate, each gesture authentic. And then, unexpectedly, a group of people approached me, laughing, joking, seemingly about nothing, yet somehow aware of my presence. I felt the old panic threaten to coil inside me, but I drew a deep breath, grounded myself, and allowed interaction without fear. I laughed genuinely, responded naturally, moved with grace I hadn't yet realized I possessed. When they passed, still smiling, I felt an unparalleled exhilaration. I had navigated social chaos, had inhabited my presence fully, and emerged intact, empowered, undeniably me. Returning home that night, the city lights glowing softly through my apartment windows, I collapsed into bed, exhausted, elated, and trembling. I traced the lines of my face in the mirror one last time before sleep, noting subtle shifts in expression, posture, and energy that had emerged not from clothing or makeup but from lived experience. I whispered softly, almost reverently, "I am here, I am mine, I am fully me." And for the first time, it felt absolute. The months of fear, trembling, rehearsal, doubt, triumph, practice, and whispered guidance had culminated in a singular, undeniable truth. I had claimed myself, body, mind, and soul. Sleep came slow but certain, carrying with it a strange serenity. In dreams, I moved freely, unafraid, unjudged, fully embodied. When I awoke, sunlight brushed against my skin, soft, warm, tangible. I rose, moved through the apartment, traced the curve of my neck, the tilt of my shoulders, the sway of my hips. Each reflection, each touch, each breath affirmed the journey I had undertaken. I had faced fear, judgment, and self-doubt, navigated the turbulence of social expectation, and emerged not broken but whole, not diminished but luminous. In the weeks and months that followed, I continued to explore the world fully, with courage, vulnerability, and presence. Every interaction, every step, every mirror became both practice and revelation. I discovered nuances in expression I had never imagined, textures of voice I had never heard, possibilities in posture I had never known. The velvet skirts, the silk blouses, the careful gestures, they became extensions of a self no longer hidden, no longer tentative, no longer bound by fear. I had become not merely someone dressed in transformation, but a living embodiment of self-possession and authenticity. And finally, in a quiet evening of reflection, journal open, city lights dancing across the walls, I wrote the words I had been approaching for months, hesitant, trembling, almost afraid to claim them. I am complete. I am seen. I am mine. This self, fragile yet unbreakable, is everything I have longed for, everything I have built, everything I will continue to become. The realization was overwhelming, not in a single, triumphant rush, but in a subtle, persistent bloom, a radiance that infused every cell, every thought, every breath. I had not simply transformed outwardly. I had transformed inwardly, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. The journey was far from over, yet I no longer feared it. Fear existed, yes, but as a companion, a reminder of courage, a testament to growth. I had crossed thresholds I had once believed impossible. I had navigated social labyrinths, confronted myself in mirrors and streets alike, faced judgment and potential ridicule, and emerged not only intact but fully present, radiant, and aligned. As I closed my journal and allowed my gaze to linger on my reflection, I realized with a quiet, reverent awe that I had not just been reshaped. I had claimed myself. Every trembling step, every whispered affirmation, every hesitant experiment had led here. A self fully embodied, unapologetic, luminous, and mine. The mirror no longer reflected a stranger. It reflected me. And I, finally, could breathe fully, step fully, and exist fully, in a world I had once feared, but now inhabited entirely as the person I had always been destined to become.